So let's look at a podcast. Now, as you look at the items for a podcast, you're going to see that it's very similar. Same kind of thing. You need a mission statement or a vision or some sort of theme and an approach and a tone, those things that make the podcast what it is. Very much like blogging, you're going to have this style of writing with a blog. You want to have this style of presenting for a podcast. And same thing. Is it just you? Are you going to be doing interviews? Are you going to be maybe grabbing snippets of other stuff? Because maybe you're playing some some snippets of either shows or other podcasts or other interviews or things like that. All of that you want to think through and say, okay, how am I going to do this? With a podcast, even more so than a blog, there are definitely production values that you need to consider. Is this, and this really is sort of even part of like your branding and stuff like that. Does it sound like you're sitting in a closet somewhere when you're doing the podcast? Are you going to have some high-end audio equipment, or is there going to be some production done to that and editing, or are you just going to sit down and start riffing and then record it for however long and then post it? Are you going to have like an opening and closing audio segment? Are you going to have advertisements are going to be put in? Is it going to be just like you start talking and you're done, or is there like segments to your podcast? All of those things you want to think through those, because you want that to be consistent from episode to episode, so that your audience has a sense of this is how this thing works, and they sort of expect it to flow in that certain way. Same thing we talked about before. Set up a schedule, a calendar. Particularly if you're involving other people, if you're doing interviews in that, then you need to get the interview scheduled way before you're going to want to get that produced and published, because you got to, make sure that whatever issues they may have with scheduling and last minute things that come up, there may be a problem recording it. So you have to record it again. There is a lot that could go wrong. So schedule out, figure out, are you going to, promote is this going to go out once a day, once a week, once a month, a couple times a week, whatever it is. And even more so probably than a blog, let's make sure we have our initial topics list built up. Let's, start putting the pieces together, particularly if you've got like advertisements or pre or post audio or anything like that. If you've got themes that you want to hit on a regular basis, maybe even reuse some of your recordings about those themes or those stories or those informational nuggets, then you're going to want to get those pieces in place. With a podcast, more like a blog, it's really easy. You could use like our Launch Your Internet Business. Within a couple of days, you can have a site thrown up on AWS, have a WordPress site, and start blogging, and you're off and running. With the podcast, yeah, you can record it and just have those recordings available. But for, to actually be a podcast that people are going to see show up on, particularly like Apple's podcasts or all of the different podcatchers that are out there, or Stitcher, I can't remember all the different stuff that's out there. Then you need to figure out, spend a little bit of time of what channels am I going to publish through? And in particular, what needs to be done to get on that? What kind of lead time do I have? Apple in particular, it takes, I think minimum, it's going to take you probably a couple of weeks once you've put some episodes together and you've followed all of their branding guidelines, which are things like, you have to have like a cover page and an icon and, content about like, what is this podcast about? What's categories, things like that, I think when I put those together, the first time I put together a podcast, I think it probably took me an hour or two, just sitting down, walking through, getting all that stuff together, throwing the content in. And that's not including like getting a logo put together and things like that. So you need to think through that. There's some upfront work that needs to be done. And it's not stuff that has to be done all the time. It's basically, to get launched, but you're going to want to make sure that you've walked through those steps and explored those. And then again, as we get to that launch date, how are we going to, what kind of announcements are we going to have? How is this going to get, how are we going to get listeners? How are we going to get heard as far as, putting out this podcast? And some of it may be tied to that prior bullet point there of your publishing channels or your partners. Is it just, if you can get out on Apple Podcasts, and if somebody, once you're launched, if somebody's looking for your topic, then they can find your podcast. It may be challenging because there's a million podcasts out there, literally, I think maybe more than a million now. But again, how am I going to let people know that I've done this, assuming that that's what you want to do? So let's talk about your YouTube channels. The prior to, we were writing with a blog, we're talking with a podcast. Now we're talking audio and video when we go to YouTube, and there's other places out there like it, but just YouTube's sort of like, like Apple is the big podcast place. YouTube is going to be your big video place. Although there are like, Twitch or Twitch and stuff like that. There are definitely other platforms that are out there and other channels you can look at, depending on what it is that you want to produce. Again, you find this looks very familiar. You want to have some sort of like a theme or a mission statement. What am I going to produce? And it may be very specific. It could be, I'm going to do little snippets of code in Java every 3 days or 3 times a week. I'm going to have a little, Java coding session that I do for people to learn from. It could be more general. It could be, I'm going to have programming tips and tricks, or I can go back like gardening tips and tricks. It may be like project based, like I'm going to do projects, and maybe they could be programming projects. Maybe it's like constructions. I'm going to do home improvement projects, a la, was it This Old House or something like that. And I'm going to do regular videos, YouTube sessions of me doing that. It could be a travel log. It's all kinds of stuff like that. But again, particularly with, once you add, as you add senses to the channel, to the communication, with writing, it's really just content. Once you add audio, there is your voice, how you speak and inflect and all that adds emotion even to your communication. And now when you get into video as well, then you add things like your look, but also, how do you dress up? Do you do makeup? Do you do, whatever as part of that? And it could be, video can get far ranging. So it could be that you dress up as a Smurf for your YouTube channel all the time. Which, hey, if somebody makes a lot of money as like a programming Smurf YouTube channel, just give me credit that I threw that idea out, just because I don't need money. I just want people to say, oh yeah, that was Rob's quote brilliant idea. But when you get to the video stuff, there is a lot to consider, because it can be, you just turn on a camera and point at yourself and it's however you look that day. But it could be something where you want to make sure that when I do this, I want to be, I don't know, in a suit and tie, or I want to have, a lot of people do, I want to have like a clothes that I'm wearing, like whether I've got a coat or a shirt or whatever, or baseball cap, that have logos or other things that are promoting my show, or maybe promoting other people's shows. There may be, you could be like, you could be somebody that, like, your shtick is that you always wear this specific hat or style of hat, or you always have these funky glasses or whatever it is. You need to think about that, because now you're not only producing content, you're talking through it, and then your mannerisms, how you look, that impacts it as well, assuming there's a camera on you. If you're doing something where you're recording yourself doing work on a desktop, a la the Developerpreneur YouTube channel, you do need to think about what is on the desktop. Sometimes some people, their desktop is always the same, and it's got, again, you may have a background that promotes your, your site and provides information about it, but it may not. It may be something else. You may not want to do that, but you also may need to do things like adjust your IDEs that you use, or font sizes and colors and stuff like that, so that somebody that's watching it can actually see what you're doing. For example, for myself, it's like I have much smaller fonts, but when I go to record, I have to blow those things up so that it's actually visible to a typical viewer. Again, scheduling, calendar, your stuff should drop like clockwork. You pick a time, every Saturday at noon, you have a release, something like that. You need a release schedule that will help so much to build momentum and to build a following. Again, you need a topics list. I would say usually, with your topics list, you want enough that those are going to last you for your first, probably month or two of going through it, that you've got a nice long list to work from. And then you're just going to want to make sure that you're continuing to build on that on a regular basis. If you're going through all this work from a video point of view, then you probably want to consider you monetizing it. Do you want to bring in, do you want ads to be available? How often are ads going to show up? How often, the timing of my releases and how that may impact my following, my ability to monetize. Some of that's the language and the things that you use. Is this going to be suitable to all audiences, or is this more like an adult only kind of thing? And the YouTube world, once you get into particularly YouTube, you're going to have to watch out for copyrights. They will block you from monetization. They will block you from maybe even being shown, depending on how you use other people's content. And this includes audio. So if you've got some sort of soundtrack that's, a music bed, then you need to be aware of whether that's, do you have the rights to produce that, to make that part of your show? If you have little video snippets, do you have the rights to doing that? Because if you don't, then they will pull it. And I think they're still pretty aggressive about it. I mean, as an example, I know that I've had, my kids have just had some silly video that they wanted to do, and in the background music was playing that was, copyrighted. Maybe it's like they're listening to the radio or whatever, and it got pulled because they had too much time, which is, I think, 7 or 10 seconds, I forget what it is, but they had too much time for fair use, or it didn't fall under fair use guidelines, and so it got pulled. So you need to think about that, as particularly if you're building things that are part of all of your episodes. Like if you've got pre-roll and post-roll, if you've got snippets you're going to use on a regular basis, backgrounds you're going to have, make sure that you own that stuff, that you're following the copyright rules as expected. And then how are you going to build a following? I mean, a lot of this, if you do it right, if you've got good content and you've got a regular schedule and you announce it properly, then followers will come. But how are you going to do that? How are you going to nurture it? How are you going to make that more likely to be successful than not? And again, same thing we've seen with all the channels. So writing or audiobooks, which I sort of group together because it's really, there's a lot of similarities in this, even though, again, in writing, you're just communicating, you have content. If you go to audiobooks, then you can have production values that can factor into it, and you can add some more emotion to the content that you're sharing. If you're getting into a book, and this actually, I guess, is something that you could think about for podcasts and blogs and YouTube channels. And it does a little bit have to do with theming and stuff like that, but it's just for book in particular, or audiobook, is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? Are you going to write a story about some superhero lost in space, or are you going to write about how to do your taxes, or whatever it is? What is it's topic selection. But if you're going to do a series of books or audiobooks, is very much, what is this? And you can do a mix. You can do the called the dramatical histories or stuff like that, that are historical novels that are somewhat loosely based, varying levels, I guess, tightly to loosely based on historical events, but also have fictional characters involved. And you can think of people like a Tom Clancy or somebody like that, that have built entire series that there's fiction, but there's a lot of truth, there's a lot of reality that's woven in there as well. And so when you're writing a book or audiobook, you need to think about that, is what do I want to try? What do I want to take a stab at?